What's up, guys? Welcome to the Put Me In Coach podcast,
where we go beyond the headlines and deep dive everything NFL.
I'm Ian.
And I'm Andy.
Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you so much. What's up, man? How are you?
Gucci. How are you doing?
Fantastic, honestly. We are heading down to South Beach for this team today. The Miami Dolphins.
Baby.
Yeah,
Yes,
fun
sir.
team, man. Such a good team. I'm really, really excited to talk about them. I got the vintage, Dan Marino.
Of course.
Dan Marino piece on, one of my favorite players
Fire.
of all time.
Hi, Dan.
Who are you?
Ace Ventura, pet detective. I've been sent in with a special play. Quarterback sneak.
Guy, one of
Fire.
the best players ever to not win a championship.
Yeah. Gotta be the best, right?
I think
Like
he
the
is.
single best.
NFL-wise, definitely the best quarterback.
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard to say best
Yeah.
player. That's like getting into so many different conversations. But, man, I'm super excited to talk about this team because I feel like there's so many different outcomes that are possible.
Yeah.
So I guess without further ado, let's just dive in, man. We'll roll the clip. All right, we're back. We're back in it. Let's do the usual thing. Let's start last season. Let's work our way up to this year. Talk about some off-season stuff. Confusing year. As a guy who was rooting for this team and was very much like involved, I mentally drafted a lot of fantasy football players from this team, and I like the Dolphins. I like their uniforms. They're just a fun team to me.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a fool's gold season. Obviously, starting with the good, they had a bunch of Pro Bowlers, and including Tyreek Hill being the first team All-Pro. Tyreek was incredible last year. The last 2 years, honestly, in Miami have been unreal for him. But the offense was really kind of the fun thing last year, right? It was the motion. It was Achane, Mostert, Tua, all this fun stuff going on. Hats off to McDaniel. He's really, really schemed up a really awesome team down there. First in total offense in 2023. So with some of the offenses we saw last year, that's really, really impressive to me. I think, finishing 11-6, second in the division behind Buffalo, really close call, almost won the division. Obviously, Dolphins fans know how close it was. It came down to a Week 18 game against Buffalo in Miami, where they lost 21-14. So they were right in this thing. They were right there. Obviously, close but no cigar. They advance on to Kansas City. You draw the Chiefs wild card weekend at Arrowhead. It's -4 degrees. Never stood a chance in that game. 26-7 blowout loss. I think for me, where I want to start, and I'll volley it back to you and kind of get your thoughts on it. This team is very difficult to evaluate for me because when you look at last season, the 11-6 record really sticks out as like this really cool achievement, right? I mean, they went 9-8 the year before. It was a step forward. They won double-digit games. They made the playoffs, almost won the division. But when you peel back the layers, it's confusing because they went 1-6 against playoff teams last year. Teams that made the playoffs, including the Kansas City game, they went 1-6. The one victory they had against playoff teams was a 22-20 game at home against, ironically, the Dallas Cowboys, which you and I have said they are literally like turning into the AFC Cowboys, where it's a lot of fool's gold. And I mean, it's interesting, right? And two teams I rooted for last year got conned by both, I feel.
No.
And then you've got the 9-1 record against non-playoff teams, and the one loss coming at home against Tennessee in that kind of back and forth close game that Tennessee pulled off at the end. So for me, I just don't really know where to start with this team, which is why I'm tasking you with the burden of starting off with us, because I just, my heart's in it. I like these guys, and I have a difficult time evaluating it because they do stuff that I really like as a fan. I'm very much an offense guy. I'm very much a passing, high-flying, wide receiver type of offense guy. So this team really does it for me. But looking over our notes and looking over our research during this process, we were kind of both forced to come to some pretty uncomfortable realizations, which is the fact that this team's a bit fraudulent, like a little funny in the light,
Yeah. No, they really are. And I during my note-taking process, I kept coming back to the same question, which is that can finesse overcome physical? This is not a physical team, like at all. This is a finesse team. As you mentioned, they run a lot of motion. The exact numbers, 87% of their offensive calls were motion. I mean, that's you could count the ones that weren't much easier. You have this kind of this high flying offense that really, if you give them space, I mean, they ask Denver, right? Like that's just what they do. They're unstoppable. But when you play them tough and you play them tight and you play physical football with them, they're very beatable. And the problem that I kept seeing was that physicality is a core of this game. You can't win without it. You can't win without having kind of grit and toughness on your team, whether that's in the trenches, whether that's in your secondary, whether it doesn't matter where it is, you have to have that physical toughness. It reminds me a lot of those old Mike D'Antoni Rockets teams that would just shoot the lights out of the ball, but they just never would play defense. It was like, we can beat you with offense, and it's like, nah, you really can't though, because when push comes to shove, you still need to play defense. You still need to have a defensive game plan. You can't just out offense me. And I feel like this is kind of the NFL version of that. You mentioned it's like you get later in the season. They're a great team in September, and I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that people are coming down to Miami. There's a ton of really hot weather. The opponent's sideline is famously like right in the sun, where the Dolphins are right in the shade, and it kind of it benefits them. It's climate stuff. But to that point, on the other spectrum of it, when you have to go into Buffalo in November and December, when you have to go to New York, when you have to go to New England, it doesn't benefit you. And that's where we see the Dolphins, as of late, kind of fall apart. Tua's a Hawaii kid who played in Alabama and then got drafted to the Dolphins. He's not going up to, he wasn't born in Chicago or Detroit, right? He's not used to these climates. And as I just said, these divisional opponents, they're all East Coast teams who you're going to have to play outdoors once a year, no matter what. And a lot of those times that falls late in the season. It's just what it is. So it is. I mean, you're right. It is super tough to if the season was a month long and September was your first 3 games were definition of whether you're going to the Super Bowl or not. They'd be a dynasty, but they're not that. I guess.
Well, and real quick, there's no bigger microcosm of this fact than. Do you know why in Week 18 it came down to that game for the division?
I don't. Why?
Because the week earlier, December 31st at Baltimore, they lost 56-19 at Baltimore. That's why.
Yeah, I mean,
that's why.
Kind of my point, right?
At Baltimore,
East Coast team
December,
on the outdoor, yeah.
And they lost by 40, damn near 40 points. And that's well,
what happened. And it's not even that it's necessarily their fault. That playing, like that style of play, doesn't translate to cold weather, right? Cold weather is like run the football. You saw in the Chiefs game when it was record lows or whatever. Like I think it was the coldest game ever played in the history of the NFL. Yeah. They had no run game. I mean, they had no run game, right? Because they're so reliant on this pass heavy offense. But it doesn't matter when Tyreek Hill has 63 yards because you need to ground and pound it. That's the whole reason you have the trenches built, is to win games like that, win games in all different climates. You can't just, hey, we're in Miami, everybody's loose, everybody's, we can high fly this offense all over the place. It's just not something that translates to these cold weather cities late in the year.
Right.
But I do want to go ahead.
No, before we go into the Tua stuff, I do want to touch on their head coach, because I feel like,
yeah, please.
I can't gloss over like what he's done. What's really interesting is I think sometimes, because football is a TV sport, because the coverage, with guys like us all the way up to guys like Colin Cowherd are covering these teams, there's an entertainment value to it. And Mike McDaniel really provides a lot of entertainment to the game, right? He's vaping on the sideline. He's wearing off-white Jordans. He's like, he's rapping. He's driving Lamborghinis. He's one of the guys, right? And, I personally, I enjoy it. I think it's fun. I think it's new. I think it's new school. Kind of out with the stodgy old coaches and in with the new fun thing. And what he's done coming from the Shanahan tree, he hasn't missed a beat. In some ways, you mentioned it with the 87%. He's revolutionized offense, like in just a couple of years as a head coach. So it's really impressive. One thing that I'm coming to understand a bit about him, and Dolphins fans can argue with me in the comments if you guys disagree, but I imagine some of you will kind of nod your heads. Despite the fact that he has done such an amazing job, designing an offense, and he really has, second to, only a couple of guys in the league, he has equally struggled with calling plays. And I think part of it's being a new head coach. So I don't know if that's going to change this year, but it is something I did want to touch on before we kind of get into personnel and some things that we wanted to touch on with the players, because it doesn't get discussed. I had to dig through stuff to kind of find out what's the deal with this coach, because he's so lovable, he's so likable, he's so interesting, right? That we're all kind of fascinated with what he's doing. The dirty little secret is there's a bit of an Andy Reid in Philadelphia going on, where he's so good at the architecture that he kind of forgets how to call plays in these big games, and he's really struggled with play calling in a lot of big spots. So just wanted to touch on him real quick before we kind of move on to the players, because he is a huge part of this team.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. He does feel like one of those guys that we might look at in a few years and go, are you supposed to just be an offensive coordinator, right? Like we've touched on it with Kyle Shanahan's inability to kind of get over the hump. He can get there, but he can't get over the hump. And we touched on it in a video recently when talking about Josh McDaniels a little bit, and Spags. That was kind of the comparison of these two guys who were unbelievable coordinators, but couldn't really get it done as head coaches. I think McDaniels is, it was his first year last year. You said it perfectly, right? He's a new coach. It's going to take some time. I'm not going to judge him on that right off rip or after one season. I'm not just going to write the book and say, hey, this is what this guy is. He could totally surprise us, but it wouldn't.
It was his second season time, it last year. Yeah, but
was it okay? Okay, so either way, he
these things take time.
Period. I guess that's all the point I'm getting to. I'm not going to write the book on him and say, hey, this is what this guy is. He could absolutely get over the hump, and it wouldn't shock me. But it wouldn't shock me if in 5 to 7 years we're looking at the situation and going, yeah, I think he'd be a really good offensive coordinator, but I'm not sure about. He could just never get over that hump as a head coach. So time remains to be seen. We'll see how that goes. Mm-hmm. I do want to touch on their quarterback though, because he is quite possibly the most interesting case in the NFL. I think it's known at this point that Trevor Lawrence got a very big contract. Jared Goff got a very big contract, and Tua was expected to kind of be that third player in there who was getting a contract in that same ballpark. And as of July 5th at 9:11 p.m., it has not happened yet, and it sounds like, from what I was reading today, is that he's getting quite frustrated with the lack of a process being done here. And I think you can argue it both ways. I think I understand it from a player standpoint. You know, Tua himself kind of famously said, "Hey, the market is the market." Like, you know, who am I to judge, right? And then when you look at Trevor Lawrence's stats, you go, well, those aren't as good as Tua's. You look at Jared Goff's stats, they're better than Tua's, and he's had more success. So somewhere in between makes sense, but Goff got paid less than Lawrence did, so it makes it a little confusing. He's coming off a year, you know, he's 25 years old. He completed 69% of his passes, threw for 4,624 yards, 29 touchdowns, and 14 interceptions. An objectively good year. He has a 34-19 all-time record. And like you said just a minute ago, he's 0-1 in the playoffs. It's just kind of an interesting place for them to be in, because do you feel comfortable paying this guy 55, you know, I guess less than 55 is what Lawrence got. So let's say anywhere from Goff got 52, Lawrence got 55, let's say 53, 54 million a year. Do you feel comfortable paying him that? Because Miami, with their lack of getting something done, is telling us, no, we don't feel comfortable paying that. And with the injury history, especially the last, 2 years ago, where he had a bunch of really scary injuries to his head, I kind of understand it. I kind of understand looking and going, he's one hit away. He's one hit away from having to medically retire. And that would keep me back as well. That would hold me back as well. But that being said, we've talked about it many a times on the show. It's a lot easier to get worse at quarterback than it is to get better. So what do you go out there and do? It's much like the Dak Prescott situation. Do you go out there and test the market? Do you bring in kind of a bridge guy? Do you kind of restart this whole thing? Do you let him go test free agency? What do you do? And, you know, I'll lob it back to you, because I'm not sure I have the answer, to be honest with you. And I'm not sure you do either, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts, because I can argue it both ways, and I wouldn't be mad either way.
Yeah. Well, the answer really is that, you know, Andy, you don't have the answer, and I don't have the answer, because nobody has the answer.
You ain't got the answers, man. You ain't got the answers. You ain't got the answers. You ain't got the answers, Sway.
I think quiet as kept, his front office doesn't have the answer. Do you remember when Justin Fields got traded to the Steelers, and they gave a 6th-round pick that could become a conditional 4th if he plays 50% of the snaps, which I'm not sure he's going to. I told you that it was, in my opinion, criminal that about 15 teams in the NFL didn't offer more, right? Screw a conditional. I'll give you a straight-up 4th. You want our late 3rd next year? You can have it. We'll take Justin Fields. To me, this is one of those teams that was high on that list for me, of a team that I would have liked to see give up just a 4th-round pick straight up for Justin Fields. The reason for that being is, you know, when we talk about money, we want to, two things are in play, right? It's the first part of it is the actual play on the field. The second part of it is health, and then there is a third part, which is sort of the business element of it. Last year, he played very well, coming off of a year that we weren't sure that he was going to play again, which is hugely relevant, and you touched on it, right? That's the only year he's had since he got drafted that was an elite quarterback season by any metric. So he has one really good season, and now he wants the money. A season in which, by the way, not that winning is everything, not that it's nothing, but was finished off with, you know, a huge blowout loss at Baltimore, a loss for the division title at home to Buffalo, and a playoff game where he looked like a tackling dummy.
I'm gonna bring us back. Right 32, flex dive motion, on one, ready. Yeah, it's Brucey's time to shine, baby.
Back is Brucey, who will try to find a handle on the ball this time.
Go it, Brucey! Oh, shit!
And look out.
And was absolutely, had his pants pulled down and was spanked in front of the entire world watching at Arrowhead. That game wasn't on the defense. I know a lot of fans like to talk about the Bradley Chubb and Jaylen Phillips loss, and those are big losses that we'll touch on later. But that game was, Tua had no answers. Tua looked like an absolute high school kid out there throwing the ball around. He was lost. So when you go down the list of guys, right, he's obviously not in the big four, the Burrow, Allen, Lamar, Joe thing. When you start to really look at where he ranks, he kind of comes out in this sort of 16, 15 range of quarterbacks, like straight up middle of the pack. And that's not a bad thing. I think he's a good quarterback, but the reality is, he's not a young, exciting quarterback that's shown a bunch of upside like Jordan Love or CJ Stroud. He's not a veteran quarterback that's proven it like Kirk Cousins or Aaron Rodgers or Matt Stafford, those two particularly who have like the rings. He's not as good as the other guys he gets thrown into the camp to as Jared Goff. Jared Goff's made 2 deep playoff runs. Jared Goff has more size than Tua. He throws a better ball than Tua, and he's won more in both places that he's gone. Dak Prescott is better than Tua, flat out. The numbers prove it. My eyes prove it. Like, he's better. He's not young and dynamic like Jaylen. There's no real comp for him other than Geno Smith, Baker Mayfield. That's kind of where he is. If you're really being honest, if you're taking everything away, and I know he doesn't play football in a vacuum, but do you really, honestly, can you tell me, Dolphins fans, that if you were to sign Geno Smith or Baker Mayfield, that he couldn't approximate what Tua's done for you? Genuinely. You guys can comment below and let me know if you disagree. But I'm going to go on record and say I believe that those guys could do that. Those guys are on team-friendly deals. Those guys, Baker Mayfield just signed a new contract. He got paid. I'm not against Tua. I'm not against the Dolphins retaining Tua and paying him. But it's a similar conversation that's going to happen with Brock Purdy coming up in San Francisco. And I actually believe that Brock Purdy has shown more than Tua has. He's made 2 deep playoff runs. He throws a better ball than Tua. He has more mobility than Tua. He's done more than Tua has with the same amount of weapons and help. So I can't look at Tua and go, he's the driving force of anything on this team other than being a very good game manager, which he has been, and he deserves to get another contract from this team. The problem is he wants money on the level of guys that have just been outplaying him for years. And at this rate, I'm not a contract reward guy. Again, the person that everyone likes to trot out is Trevor Lawrence. Look at the numbers. He's right up there with Trevor Lawrence. This is where the business component comes in for me. Trevor Lawrence is the Jacksonville Jaguars right now. From a business perspective, from a ticket sales, from a jersey sales, from a TV deal, from sponsorships, Trevor Lawrence matters to Jacksonville a lot. Tua Tagovailoa is not the driving force in Miami. Tyreek Hill, Jaylen Waddle, the offense, Achane people are talking about now. They have Ramsey at corner. Mike McDaniel, their coach, is exciting and interesting. It's Miami. It's the Dolphins. It's the jerseys. It's the teal blue. This guy is not making the franchise in the same way that Burrow is, in the same way that Trevor Lawrence is, and he hasn't done anything that has shown us that this guy is a driving force of a team that can make a deep playoff run, and he has had a lot of help around him. So my answer is yes, I think the Dolphins should re-sign him, but if he's not willing to take, frankly, a lower-end deal, then you have to franchise tag him. You have to let him play out his deal this year and go into this year with that looming over the season and just deal with what happens, because he hasn't proven to me that he's worthy of it. And people will say Trevor Lawrence hasn't proven it, but Trevor Lawrence has all the tools, and Trevor Lawrence is the franchise. Tua is neither of those things. So that's my take on it. I hope that kind of things
well,
out.
Lawrence won a playoff game too. I mean, that it doesn't matter that much, but it does kind of matter. Kind of peeling back the layers on this whole situation too. Which give me the biggest red flags that I came across, which was that you lost your center and you lost your right guard. We know that in 22 he had some really scary head injuries to the point where there's an argument to be made that he probably should have medically retired. He'll probably have to deal with that down the line, but as it is right now, he's obviously healthy, but when you lose a center like Connor Williams, top 10 guy, top 5 guy really by top 3, I think, by PFF metrics by the end of the year last year. When you lose a guy like that, and then you lose a guard like Robert Hunt, it's got to be the number one priority to replace them, especially knowing that your quarterback is injury prone. And he's smaller, and he's, these guys coming off the edge, they're gonna hit his chest, right? He throws left-handed, right? They're not hitting his back, so his body isn't falling forward; it's falling back, and that's where the head smacks the back of the ground a lot. They didn't replace those guys, even kind of. Connor Williams tore his ACL, and I think in like week 11 or something, it was against Tennessee in December. Pretty nasty injury. It's the most I could get a read on it was that he's not sure if he's going to medically retire or not. It might keep him out forever. He might sign with somebody once his rehab's over, but it's not really the thought right now. So that's out of the way. Robert Hunt obviously goes to Carolina and gets this stupid bag, crazy, like $20+ million deal. Super deserving, but again, you have to replace those guys. I know that you took a guy in the second round, but he's a tackle. He's not a guard or a center. So I guess I just wonder what exactly was the plan there. They went and got Aaron Brewer from Tennessee, but Tennessee had the worst offensive line in the league last year. I'm pretty sure, didn't they? So
yeah, at least bottom 3. Yeah.
Yeah. So exactly. So it's like, what exactly does that do for me? And then you get kind of a next man up syndrome at guard. Like there was no free agent they went out and got to replace them. They just had depth. So they're like, oh, okay, we're just going to go with the next guy up. So I don't understand how during a contract year where you're potentially going to pay your quarterback $50+ million, you are just saying, well, we'll kind of sign some mid here at center, and why would you not want to protect your asset as much as you can unless you plan to sabotage that asset? I don't know. We could be getting into conspiracies here. I mean, how Stephen Ross gets down. He doesn't play games fairly always, but
Yeah. Friend of the show.
It's just friend of the show, of course. Ross Business School, baby.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean that's to me that's like the giant red flag for Tua personally is like it's not so much Tua, it's who's protecting him, and are we going to get 3 games into the season and he's going to be missing 3-4 weeks at a time because he keeps getting head injuries, or even worse, having to medically retire, because that would be obviously worst case scenario. And then do I write that in his contract? Do I have a clause where I get out of this if he has to medically retire? Is that even ethical? Like, you know what I mean? Like that's right. the questions I have to start asking myself if I put my GM hat on. And it's a tough situation. I do not envy that situation even kind of.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'll do you one better. I think the loss of those, frankly, elite interior offensive linemen doesn't just hurt Tua, it hurts this whole offense.
100%.
When you're going over the Dolphins, we're at that part of the show where I just get really, really excited because these pieces are awesome.
Yeah, you love the pieces.
I do. I love the pieces, man. And, you're right to touch on those things because it's a marriage, it's all symbiotic. Those guys block up front, they maintain the blocks, they create space. These guys do their thing. A big fear I have coming into this season is the running game from as it stood from last season. I'll start with the good for me. I think Devon Achane is a star in the making. I actually think he is like that. He put on some size this offseason, so I think if he can maintain the speed that he had last year and the quickness he had last year with a little bit of size, he could take a step forward. But he did get banged up quite a bit last year, and he hasn't proven yet. To me, he's proven everything except for can you stay healthy and take a bigger workload and kind of be a bigger threat than just a weapon. The reason why I say that he needs to do that is because of who their running back one was last season. Raheem Mostert, a guy that I have a ton of respect for, but prior to this year, this past year, a guy that we weren't talking about really since the NFC Championship game in 2019 where he ran for 4 touchdowns against Green Bay. You know that? Remember that game, the infamous?
Yeah, of course.
I mean, this is a guy who had a career riddled with injuries. He's now 32 years old, and he's coming off of over 1,000 yards rushing and 18 touchdowns, which led the league last season. I don't think you're going to be able to replicate that ever again from Raheem Mostert, which means the losses of those 2 guys on the inside is now a threat to your running game because it is, and to your quarterback. I'll touch on the receivers in a minute, but it's also a threat to this running game that was incredible last season. I know they drafted Jaylen Wright. I'm excited to see what he can do. He's a bit of a change of pace in terms of what those two. He's not a pure speed guy. He's got a little more size. So I think they have thought ahead. But Devon Achane needs to do what I believe he can do this year, and he's going to have a harder time doing it because of those losses. And besides that, obviously they took Jaylen Waddle a couple of years ago, 6 overall. He's been a good receiver. He didn't quite do last year what he did in 22, but he got banged up. I think we all know what he is. He's very, very, very good. He's very fast, and he's a very, very capable wide receiver. But the great Bambino of this offense really is Tyreek Hill. I have some concerns about Tyreek. I think that Tyreek right now is the best wide receiver in football. So it's got nothing to do with how he plays. But Tyreek Hill is now 30 years old, coming off of the 2 biggest seasons of his career and best seasons of his career. Tyreek Hill is making top 5 wide receiver money, but has publicly said that he wants a new deal for more money. I don't really understand what that means because I just saw, all these guys get new contracts, and Tyreek got one a couple of years ago that was at the time the biggest contract. So now it's like the 4th biggest. I mean, I don't know why he needs a new deal, but he does, according to him. A lot of noise from him this offseason with the family stuff and with the paternity stuff and just those kind of the lawsuits, and that takes a lot out of him, man. It really does, man. That's baby mama drama. That's a phrase for a reason, right?
Hi, Daddy.
Hi, Dad.
Whose goddamn white baby is that?
This is your baby, okay? He's just light-skinned.
That one might be mine. That one right there. I'm not totally sure. Just because you name him Darren don't mean he belonged to Darren. But I don't care what this baby's name is. This baby is rice-skinned, but not light-skinned. That is a white child. That is Caucasian from the mountains of Caucasus.
So for me, with the contract you gave Waddle, and now Tyreek talking more money, you are doubling down on, by far, including Philadelphia, the most expensive receiving room in the NFL. Now you're talking about paying your quarterback all this money. You lost 2 interior offensive linemen that I love. Your star running back last season is 32 this year, and it's history of injuries. I have some concerns for a team that I have really kind of fallen in love with offensively, and I think we talked about this, but offensively, it felt like last year was the year. And now you're kind of left wondering, well, if we couldn't pull it off last season and Tua couldn't play well down the stretch and we didn't really do anything when the money was on the line, how are we going to recreate what we had last year? I mean, I don't quite know.
You're not.
It's very hard to follow that up, especially with these losses like you touched on. So that's kind of my take on the offense, and I appreciate you letting us know about the O-line because it's not really being discussed in the media,
Yeah, they did draft two guys late in the rounds. Malik Washington out of Virginia at 6 and in the 6th round, and Taj Washington in the 7th round out of USC. I don't think those guys are going to be like world beaters, but I do think that adds a lot of depth. I think they're both shifty, really fast guys. Mike McDaniel guys. You know the archetype. So there could be some good depth there, especially in that room. There's a lot of veteran leaders there. So that could be something, could be nothing, probably more nothing, especially next year. But you never know how that works out. Right. And then they brought in Jonnu Smith from Atlanta on a deal to play tight end, and I love that pickup for them. But
it's a good player.
Yeah, man, I'm with you, man. I think there's going to be a bit of a fall off for that offense this year, it just kind of feels like that's the storm that's brewing out there in Dade County. So
yeah, and I would love to see them do it again, but it just felt like last year they really did it. I mean, I was enamored. I know you were too, watching the games, and how just incredible that offense was, and it kind of amounted to nothing. I mean, it amounted to a 1-6 record against playoff teams and a first-round exit blowout.
You blew it.
It's a bummer. So I think we'll move on. I think we'll get to the other half of this team, the less talked about half of this team, but a very talented roster on the defensive side of the ball. They draft Trop Robinson to play end. Where are you on this front? And do you think that they can keep it going the way they have? They really were pretty good last year.
Yeah, I actually love their defensive front. So you bring in Anthony Weaver. He was the assistant head coach to John Harbaugh last year in Baltimore. Also the D-line coach. Obviously, unbelievable D-line last year in Baltimore. Unbelievable defense just all the way around. So you bring him over, make him your DC. You take Chop Robinson, which I think is it's a good pick. If I can refer back to my kind of rant a few minutes ago, with how many potentially generational tackles and centers and guards there were in this draft, I felt it was a bit irresponsible to, take Chop Robinson there when he wasn't that big of a need. I mean, he's a need. Don't get it twisted. He's a need, but he's not. I'm not sure he was a bigger need than maybe a Jackson Powers Johnson who could play center and guard, or a Cooper Beebe who could play guard. The list goes on, right? There was a lot of Graham Barton is a good example too. That all guys they could have had, they passed on him. They went for Chop Robinson. I'm not mad at it. It'll be interesting to look back at in a few years. Like I said, they did take that Paul kid out of Houston, so they didn't not address the line, but I would have addressed it a little earlier and maybe went with somebody off the edge a little later, but it is what it is. You sign Calais Campbell and Shaq Barrett. I think those are two really good pieces to sign. Calais Campbell, I mean, he's damn near done. I mean, he's 36 this year, but he had a good year last year. So maybe not. You know what I mean? He might have one more in him, maybe even two. You know what I mean? It's a low investment. So
he's 37, by the way, turning 38. Sorry to interrupt.
He's 37, turning 38. Whoa.
Yeah, in September.
I thought he was 36. That's crazy.
Yeah, bro.
That's nuts. Guy. Well, there you go. You just brought home my point a little more.
Yeah.
You have Shaq Barrett. Obviously, he was a key piece of that Bucs defense that won it all back in 2020. He's always been really good. But he's getting up there in age too. I bet he's in his mid-30s at this point. It's you got Bradley Chubb, and you have now Chop Robinson. I mean, and Jaylen Phillips. I totally forgot about Jaylen. He might be the best one of them all. Mm-hmm. So you have a really, really sneaky good line. You lose Christian Wilkins. That sucks. But you also have this Zach Zeisler guy who... Zeeler. I don't really know how to say. You're going to have to correct me in the comments here, Dolphins fans. But apparently, you guys called those two salt and pepper because they just complemented each other so well. And when you look at their numbers, they were pretty alarming. They were damn near identical. I think Wilkins might have had 2 more tackles than Zach did, and Zach had 1 more sack. So it ended up being pretty even. So you might, and I say this lightly, you might not have lost a huge piece when you look at what the Raiders ultimately gave Wilkins to come over there in free agency. And then you brought in Jordan Brooks from Seattle, and you also brought in Anthony Walker Jr. from that great Browns defense. So this front seven's kind of nasty, like on the lowest of keys. They really rebuilt it, and I know you were going to touch on those injuries that they dealt with last year, so I'll let you cook on that for a second too. But I have big hopes for this defense, to be honest with you. I think when you look at the pieces, I know you're going to touch on the secondary too, but when you look at the pieces they have in that secondary, the linebackers and the D line, it's kind of, I mean, on paper it's definitely there. everything's got to mold together and it's got to work. But again, this is the physical that we were talking about at the beginning of the episode. This is how you change that culture. This is how you bring that physical in and you beat those teams in November and in December. That's how you go and beat a Buffalo. You have a D-line like this. That's how you go and beat a New York Jets. You have a D-line like this. You gotta rattle these quarterbacks, or else Josh Allen and Aaron Rodgers are gonna make you their chumps. So that's how I feel about it. I think it's actually gonna be very, very good. I think we could possibly see it end up being like a top 5 unit by the time this upcoming season's over.
Yeah. No, well said. I think we both kind of felt that way going over this team. And to be honest, I liked their defense last year too. Speaking of last year, I mean, I know you alluded to it. Before I touch on the secondary, which is another unit on this team that I love. By the way, this roster, it's just hats off to the front office. They've really put together a very talented group of players. So I know it seems like we're down on them a little bit. We're not. Honestly, it's just it's a couple of major things that we're looking at, and that's all it is. I'm a little bit worried about the Jaylen Phillips, Bradley Chubb injuries last year. They were bad injuries. I mean, especially Phillips tearing his ACL. They were driving forces of that defense last year, and they took a massive step back when those two were hurt. Dolphins fans know exactly what I'm talking about. Those guys are not probably going to be ready to play week 1. So I'm interested to see how that rehab recovery process goes for those guys. I'm praying for them. They're 2 absolute dogs. I think that they are essential components to this front 7 being what it needs to be to compete in the AFC. So
yep.
I think everything you just said is spot on. The only caveat I'm adding is that it's all hanging in the balance on those guys' health. They got to get back and they got to.
I don't disagree.
What they were. But yeah, you're spot on, man. I mean, it's an interesting thing. This secondary to me, I'm impressed. I mean, you have Jaylen Ramsey, obviously, who's an all-timer. Still a Pro Bowler last year after even missing time. He didn't come into last season healthy. Everybody knew that. He was going to miss time starting the year. And he did, but he came back from injury and played up to form. I mean, it wasn't Jacksonville Jaylen Ramsey, but it was L.A. Jaylen Ramsey. I mean, he was really, really good last season, made a Pro Bowl. One thing I like that nobody's talking about is they are a part of the Washington Commanders pillaging that's going on in that secondary, where the rest of the league just got all these good players from Washington. Like, you know what I mean? Like, we talked about Cameron Curl in the last episode with the Rams.
Yeah.
And now Kendall Fuller from Washington. I mean, he had an 83 PFF grade last year. He's been a good corner for years. He's 29 now. He's a vet. He's a proper vet. I think this is a huge signing for them because Jaylen Ramsey can't be everything anymore. He's getting older. I mean, he's been so elite for so long that you had to get another guy in there. And after losing Xavier Howard, was a player that I thought was really great for you guys. You kind of replaced him with somebody I think right now who's better for my money. I mean, he was getting long in the tooth. You brought in a guy who's a veteran, but he's got a couple years left, I think, of being really good. He proved it last year. And then obviously talking about these safeties. I mean, you bring in Jordan Poyer from Buffalo last year, another guy, in my opinion, who's been excellent for many years. And you're pairing him up with Javon Holland, who's already there in that secondary at safety. Jordan Poyer had 101 tackles last season at safety. Like Jordan Poyer is an older player. But he's a crafty vet, and I like taking him out of Buffalo because that's who you're going to be competing with very closely next season. I think Buffalo and you are going to be in a bit of a dogfight. And I think having that piece on your side of things, it's addition by subtraction in a sense where your opponent can't use him, you get him. He knows what they're going to do. He's played against that offense a ton of times, so it gives you that inter division edge. You know what I mean? It's that extra little piece and that veteran thing. So it's 4 defensive backs. Those are your starters, right? And they're all veterans and they're all proven players and they're all crafty guys. They all can play football. I'm just really excited to see what happens next year in the secondary. And like you talking about the front 7 got me excited. I think this defense was underrated last year, to be honest. One One loss that I did want to touch on. I don't know if you alluded to it, but I think it matters a little bit. Van Ginkel at linebacker stepped up huge for them last year, and he signed with Minnesota.
Mm-hmm.
He's not you know what I mean? He's not one of those guys, but it'd be kind of like if we lost Anzalone in Detroit. He actually looks like Anzalone.
Yep.
He plays that
right.
role for them. He played that role really well last year. He made a ton of plays on the ball. I mean, he had picks, forced fumbles. He had a couple touchdowns, I believe. That's a game record that I would have liked to see them retain. I think he's got some juice in that locker room, and he's kind of one of those, those Thor-looking kind of eat you up linebackers, man. You know, so I'm bummed they lost him, and I'm bummed the Vikings got him because I hate the Vikings.
Yeah, right.
So it's
now we got to deal with him.
Yeah, outside of that, I mean, I think that these losses they suffered, I think they did enough this offseason to kind of make up for it, man. I think this defense is going to be really good, and I'm interested to see if they take a step back without Fangio. Obviously, moving on from him was certainly an interesting decision. Surprised me a bit, but there was apparently some locker room stuff going on with him, and I mean, I think all signs point to go for this defense next year if they can stay healthy. That's the big if.
Yeah, I agree.
So
I agree. So I guess that brings us to our conclusion. Where exactly do you see these boys next year?
So this was the hardest team for me to evaluate that we've done.
Yeah.
And it's
same.
because I like the AFC East this year in a different way. There's no Patriots.
Mm-hmm.
There's no traditional Buffalo Bills. There's just three teams that I like, but I have questions about all three. I have them as a playoff team narrowly. I have them finishing second or third. I'm not really sure yet. When we do we'll do a preseason episode right before the season starts. We'll pick the 7 playoff teams in each, AFC, NFC. But for now, you pick about 10 teams when you're doing these. You got 10 NFC, 10 AFC that you're like, it's a playoff team. I can't rule them out of the playoff team. This team's just way too talented for me to say they're not going to make the playoffs. But they won 11 games last year. I have them winning 10 this year. If they can sneak in the AFC, that would be ideal because I'd like to see what they can do this year with another year of coaching and another year of these guys gelling. But I just worry a little bit about November, December, January for this team. I really do. And I don't know that you're going to be able to do what you did last year in terms of building that big of a lead because you got lucky against a lot of bad teams, no offense. So I'm concerned, man. I don't know where I put them, and I'm leaving it as an incomplete for now, but I have them at 10-7. So I'll pass it over to you. Okay. Sorry to cop out, man. I can't do it.
It's okay.
I don't know.
I need more information. It works because I have a little bit more of a solidified take. I actually do have them missing the playoffs next year. And it mainly comes down to missing that center and guard. I think Tua's going to get hurt again. I don't think it's going to be any type of season-ending thing, but I do think he's going to get banged up, and I think he's going to miss a couple of games, and I think that's where Buffalo's going to narrowly outplay them, and I think they're going to end up in third in that division, and they're going to miss the playoffs just narrowly.
Yep.
Because I'm drinking some other Kool-Aid this year. Jet, Jets.
Oh,
just
boy.
a little precursor. So I do have them coming in third in the division. Buffalo second, New York first. And hey, I could be wrong. There's a ton of talent on this team. It is a hard division. It's hard to plant your flag on anybody in this division because I think Buffalo could win it. I think Miami could win it. I think the Jets could be a dumpster fire as they typically are, and I will walk away with egg on my face. But it feels like everything's kind of coming together for New York this year, and I think this will be their one year where they could do it. I think it'll be a small step back for you guys, but again, I think next year. It's similar to like kind of what we were saying about the Chargers with this defensive group. It might take a year to kind of get everybody acclimated, to kind of get everybody in rhythm with each other. It's not so young like LA is and so kind of gutted, but it is. You need Chop Robinson to step up. You need Phillips and you need Phillips and what's his name? I'm blanking totally. Bradley Chubb to get healthy completely, and that might not happen. They might get thrown to the fire and have to play injured all next year, and they might lose a step. And so it might take until the 2025 season to kind of get everybody 100% healthy and acclimated, and then figure out the Tua drama and figure out your center and your guard. And then, I think Tyreek still got years left, but you also have Jaylen Waddle, who just got paid, who's much younger and is dynamic in his own right. And then you have these other hopefully dynamic receivers coming in that you drafted. So it could be a kick the can year for Miami. I think if I'm a betting man, that's what I'm going to go with.
Yeah, it felt like until the injuries to the ends last year was the year, and everything went wrong in New York. The Buffalo Bills had such a wonky season that really only came together in the end. And New England is in a full-blown, absolute starting from the bottom rebuild right now. So I just don't know that you can count on a horrible start from Buffalo and the Jets to completely fall apart. Now, Dolphins fans will tell you we can count on the Jets to completely fall apart, but I don't know I don't know that what happened last year in New York is going to happen again. So I'm with you. I think third feels about right. We'll see when we do our 7, kind of if I have them in there, but I can't do it just yet. I can't pull the trigger. I love them too much. The heart wants what the heart wants. So
fair enough.
Thank you guys, Dolphins fans. Thanks for watching. Let us know in the comments what you think. If we left some important details off, Andy, thanks for doing this, man. Shout out Dan Marino.
Sir, always.
Yes,
sir.
And go Fins, baby. Prove it wrong. Get it done this year.
Yep.
Peace.
Peace.